Chapter 1. 220 Children. Gone. I read it once. Then again. The number did not change. The paper shifted under my hand a little as if it, too, was unsettled. I stared at the quarterly summary lit by the fancy Tiffany desk lamp my wife, Margaret, had given me on our 20th anniversary. District 7 East. Registered dependents aged 0 to 12, March total 1,847. June total 1,604. The numbers didn't balance. Birth registrations for the quarter, 41. Recorded mortalities, 18. Voluntary relocations, 9 families, 23 dependents total. The maths were simple. They always were. But the answer should have been 1,847, perhaps slightly higher. Instead, it was 1,604. I checked the arithmetic again on my desktop calculator. The discrepancy remained. 220 children. Gone. It was not a number you misplaced. The house was quiet around me. Margaret had retired to the sitting room an hour ago with her mystery novel, leaving me to the paperwork that always seemed to accumulate faster than I could process it. I preferred working in the evenings anyway. No telephone interruptions. No colleagues stopping by my office with queries that could have been written memos. Just the steady rhythm of review and approval, the mechanical satisfaction of moving documents from one tray to another. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across the pale green folders. Beyond its reach, my study faded into comfortable darkness. Familiar shadows. The bookshelf we'd had made to fit that alcove when we first moved into this house. The filing cabinet of the same wood as the shelves that held 30 years of processed authorizations, all neatly archived and indexed. Not a single file out of sequence. Not in 30 years. This was my domain. The place where I transformed chaos into order, where I caught the errors that slipped through other people's carelessness. This happened occasionally. Regional offices submitted reports late, or filed paperwork under incorrect quarters, or miscoded transfers between districts. The system was large. Errors crept in. That was why positions like mine existed, to catch these things, query the source data, and issue correction requests. But they didn't happen often. Not at this scale. I flipped to the appendix and traced down to the district classification codes. 7 East carried a standard residential designation. Mixed demographic. Moderate compliance rating. Nothing unusual flagged in the notes section. I wrote a careful annotation in the margin, query source, resubmit breakdown by subdistrict. There. The district coordinator would receive the request by morning, realize someone had misfiled a batch of transfer documents, and the numbers would reconcile within the week. This was routine. Systems corrected themselves when managed properly. I went to put the report aside, but my hand didn't move. It hovered there, as if waiting for further instruction. If this were a clerical error, a batch of misfiled transfers, there would be a corresponding increase somewhere else. Children didn't simply vanish. Not on paper. Not in a system like this. They moved. And movement left tracks. I pulled up the last 6 district summaries and laid them flat across the desk, searching for anomalies in neighboring regions. The pages overlapped, creating a patchwork of columns and figures. I traced my finger across the June totals, comparing them against the March baselines. District 6 Central, March 2,341, June 2,298. Down 43. District 8 North, March 1,956, June 1,923. Down 33. District 7 West, March 2,089, June 2,067. Down 22. All within acceptable variance. The sort of natural flux you'd expect from mortality and standard relocation patterns. I knew some of these coordinators. Jeff Harrison in 6 Central had been filing reports for 12 years. He was always meticulous, never a query bounced back. Patterson, Tim, in 8 North was newer. He occasionally made coding errors, but nothing that suggested carelessness with the actual data. None of them showed 200 children arriving from 7 East. No corresponding rise. No offset. No trace. I shifted in my chair. My discomfort needed somewhere physical to go. Perhaps the coordinator had used an old template. Perhaps there'd been a software error during the data export. Perhaps. I checked the March figure again. 1,847, recorded clearly. Submitted by the same district coordinator. No amendments filed since. The paper felt thin between my fingers. Insubstantial. I put it down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the desk. Something nagged at the back of my mind. Not quite a memory. More the outline of one waiting to be filled with recall. I pulled open the lower desk drawer. The suspension files filled most of it, their plastic rails catching slightly as I eased them forward. I slid them to one side, just enough to expose what was behind. An archive box sat at the back, pushed flush against the wood. 3 weeks of processed authorizations, bundled by date and waiting for monthly transfer to the records department. It was heavier than it looked when I lifted it free and brought it up onto the desk, the cardboard giving faintly under my grip. Heavier than routine paperwork had any right to be. I put it down and opened the lid. The files inside were tightly packed, each section marked with a tab. I worked through them in order, separating the groups with my hands. June. Early June. Then further in. Mid-June. There. Standard Relocation Authorization, District 7 East. Dated June 14th. I eased the document out and laid it flat on the desk in front of me. I knew what it was before I read it. The form was pre-filled, as they usually were. Destination facility codes. Transportation scheduling. Resource allocation references. Everything properly formatted, properly signed by the district coordinator. I remember that afternoon. A Wednesday. I'd been behind schedule with a backlog from the morning meeting with the regional director. There'd been some new compliance protocols that needed reviewing. My desk had been covered with pending authorizations. This one had been near the bottom of the stack, and I'd been conscious of the time. Margaret's sister was coming for dinner. I'd promised to be finished by 6. I'd reviewed it the same way I reviewed every authorization that crossed my desk: methodology check, signature verification, compliance with procedural guidelines. I'd approved it in under 4 minutes. Long enough to be thorough. Short enough not to be delayed. I scanned down the page now, reading what I'd only glanced over then. Facility designation, RT7. Capacity authorization, 190 units. Processing window, 72 hours. That should have been enough to stop me. And the 72-hour window had registered at the time. Brief processing windows usually indicated priority relocations, medical emergencies, compliance violations requiring immediate intervention. But the form had been properly coded, properly signed. The district coordinator's signature was valid. The facility designation matched the formatting standards for temporary processing centers. I remembered my hand hovering over that line for perhaps 2 seconds longer than usual, some instinct making me pause. Then I'd glanced at the clock. 5:45. I'd signed my name at the bottom and moved it to the completed stack. Units. I'd read that word 3 weeks ago and understood it to mean persons. Administrative language. Clinical, yes, but that was the nature of the work. You couldn't process thousands of documents a month if you let yourself dwell on the human particulars of every transfer. Units. Personnel. Dependents. Resources. The vocabulary of efficiency. The vocabulary that made volume possible. Underneath the capacity line, there was a classification code. It sat there in the small print, where important things were designed not to interrupt the flow of process. Classification, DPM Priority Standard. I hadn't questioned it. Classification codes weren't my responsibility. They came from the health assessment teams, from the compliance departments, from whichever office held jurisdiction over risk modeling and population distribution. My role was procedural verification. Had the form been completed correctly? Were the signatures valid? Did the authorization align with district quotas? It had. They were. It did. I'd signed my name at the bottom and moved it to the completed stack. The form sat in front of me now, and I couldn't look away from that small line of text that included the classification code, DPM. I didn't know what it meant. I'd never needed to know. That wasn't irregular. There were dozens of classification codes in use across the registry system, each one referring to medical histories, compliance ratings, geographical risk factors. Administrators at my level didn't memorize them all. We verified process, not content. But I knew the alphabet. I knew what letters were capable of standing for. Dependent. That would make sense for a population transfer. But M. My throat was dry enough to hurt. I pulled the district summary towards me and looked at the June figure again. 1,604. Then at the authorization form. Capacity, 190. Not enough to account for the full discrepancy, but enough to be part of it. RT7. I turned that designation over in my mind. The facility codes followed a standard pattern, 2 letters for the facility type, a number for the regional designation. RT usually meant Regional Transfer Facility, temporary holding centers used during population movements. Standard administrative infrastructure. But I processed dozens of RT facility authorizations over the years, and I couldn't recall ever seeing RT7 before. That was the sort of thing I was supposed to notice. The number was higher than usual. Most regional facilities ran from RT1 through RT4. When had RT7 been established? And why hadn't there been a memo about new facility designations? My hand trembled. I pressed it flat against the desk and waited for it to stop. What was I going to write? That I'd processed an authorization 3 weeks ago and only now wondered what the classification code meant. That I'd approved a relocation without asking where the facility was, or why 190 people needed moving in a 72-hour window. Those weren't my questions to ask. The system had divisions of responsibility for a reason. You couldn't expect every administrator to understand every component. That would be chaos. And chaos was the one thing the system did not permit. Health assessments belonged to the medical teams. Compliance ratings belonged to the district coordinators. Facility operations belonged to the infrastructure departments. My role was to verify that all these pieces had been properly assembled, properly documented, properly authorized. The system worked because everyone stayed in their lane. That was how it functioned. That was how it operated at scale. I looked at the form again. At my signature at the bottom. At the word units where the word children might have been. I had signed beneath that word. This was still nothing. An error somewhere. A coding mistake. RT7 was probably a standard residential facility and DPM was probably something mundane, dependent population, monitored or district provisional, and when I submitted the query, someone would explain the discrepancy, and I would feel foolish for letting my imagination run ahead of the facts. That was what would happen. I folded the authorization form carefully and placed it back in the archive box. Then I pulled out a fresh requisition form and began writing the query in careful block letters, my handwriting steady and controlled. District 7 East, discrepancy in Q2 dependent registry totals. Request clarification on June processing and facility designation RT7. Authorization Ref 7E061 for 26 RT7. Professional. Factual. The sort of routine query that crossed administrative desks daily. For a moment, I considered tearing it up. Then I signed it, dated it, and placed it in the outgoing tray. The query would go through proper channels. What happened after that, how the query was handled, what explanations emerged, that belonged to other departments. Other administrators with their own areas of expertise and oversight. My father had always said the secret to survival was knowing which questions not to ask. He'd built an entire career on that principle. He rose through the ranks by focusing on execution rather than policy, on implementation rather than ideology. Just do your job, Ronald. Do it well. Don't make trouble. The system will take care of you if you take care of the system. I'd learned everything from him, even if we rarely spoke these days. I'd spent 30 years perfecting that approach. Keeping my head down. Doing the work. Letting others handle the complicated questions while I managed the mechanics. It had kept me employed. Kept me useful. Kept my family comfortable in a world where comfort had become dangerously scarce. That was the responsible thing to do. It had always been the responsible thing. I heard 3 light taps on the study door. This was not Margaret's usual pattern. She would have simply opened it. This was someone asking permission to enter. That alone was enough to be unusual. "Come in," I called, glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. 9:30. The door opened. Margaret stood there, her face carefully composed in that expression she wore when something was wrong, but she was trying not to alarm me. "Linda's here, dear," she said quietly. "My eldest daughter." At 9:30 on a Wednesday evening. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Send her in." Margaret nodded and stepped aside. Linda entered, and I understood immediately why Margaret had looked worried. My daughter looked wrong. Not her clothes, those were fine, ordinary. Not her hair, pulled back as usual. It was something in the set of her shoulders. The way she stood in the doorway without fully entering. The tightness around her mouth. "Hello, sweetheart." I kept my voice level. Pleasant. "This is a surprise." "Hi, Dad." She stayed near the door. Her hands moved to her coat pockets, then away again. Linda never normally fidgeted. She did not cross the room. Margaret hovered in the doorway. "I'll put the kettle on, shall I?" "Thank you, dear." Margaret withdrew, pulling the door half closed. Linda didn't move further into my study. My eldest daughter often brought her girls over in the evenings. Study nights, she called them, though I'd noticed the textbooks stayed mostly closed. They'd spread papers across the dining table and work in near silence, heads bent together, speaking in fragments I could never quite follow when I passed through to the kitchen. Last month I'd paused in the doorway, just for a moment, reaching for my reading glasses from the sideboard, and caught a glimpse of what lay between them. Not schoolwork. Printed sheets densely packed with text. Maps, perhaps. Or diagrams. The older girl, Caroline, had covered them with her arm the instant she'd sensed my presence. "Just revision notes, Grandad." I'd nodded. Collected my glasses. Left them to it. I hadn't asked what subject required maps marked with grid references. Hadn't questioned why revision notes needed to be hidden. Hadn't mentioned the conversation I'd accidentally overheard on a previous occasion, something about checkpoint rotations and supply routes that weren't monitored. Better not to know. Better to let it alone. Keep the family intact. But Linda was here now, alone, at 9:30, and the girls weren't with her. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Sit down. Please." She shook her head. "I can't stay long." "All right." I folded my hands on the desk and waited. After a second, I gave her a nudge and asked, "What's happened?" "Nothing's happened." She was too quick, too defensive. I needed to see you. At 9:30 on a Wednesday. Is that a problem?" She stared at me as if daring me to say it was a problem. "No. Of course not." I kept my tone as even as I could, although the tension in my body was building. "I'm simply trying to understand the circumstances." She looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite disappointment. Something colder. "You sound like you're processing a requisition form." The words landed harder than they should have. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. Regrouped. "I'm trying to have a conversation with my daughter, who has arrived unexpectedly, in the evening, looking distressed." "I'm not distressed." "Linda." She did up the buttons on her coat and undid them again. "I need to ask you something. About work." The tension surged and I fought to keep my face neutral. "What about work?" "The registry. Population data." She paused and seemed to gather herself. The classifications. What about the classifications? There are codes. Special designations for certain groups. I said nothing. I just waited. I need to know what they mean, she continued. The DP code specifically. The air seemed suddenly to be sucked from the room. How could it be that on this night in particular Linda should arrive here asking about the very codes I'd been puzzling over myself? That's rather general, I said carefully. There are numerous classification systems within the registry. Could you be more specific about which codes you're referring to? DPM. The words came out in a rush. What does DPM mean? I looked at her standing there, flushed and tense, asking about classification codes she had no business knowing existed. My daughter, who brought her girls over here in the evening sometimes to study things that weren't in textbooks. My hands remained folded on the desk. Steady. Controlled. I did not trust them to do anything else. Where did you hear that term? Does it matter? Yes. I measured each word carefully. It matters very much. That's restricted administrative terminology. You shouldn't have access to it. But you do. I work for the Regional Population Administration Office. Of course I do. She took a step forward, finally entering the room properly. Her voice dropped lower. Then tell me what it means. I can't discuss classified material with unauthorized personnel. I'm your daughter. Which is precisely why I can't. I unfolded my hands, spread them flat against the desk trying to stop them from shaking. Linda, please. Tell me what this is about. She stared at me. In the dim light from the desk lamp, she looked suddenly younger, like the girl who used to sit on the other side of this very desk doing homework while I worked late. Before everything changed. Before the regime solidified. I can't, she whispered. Then we're at an impasse. The word sounded rehearsed, even to me. Dad, please. I just need to know if. She stopped. Started again. There are people. Families. Who need help. What kind of help? I can't tell you that without. She turned away, pressed her hand against her forehead. This is impossible. Then help me understand. What are you involved in? Nothing. I'm not involved in anything. I just. She looked back at me. I know some people. In District 7 East. They're frightened. There are rumors about relocations. And I heard someone mention that code, DPM, and I thought if I knew what it meant, maybe I could. Could what? Help them understand what's happening. I studied her face. The careful way she'd phrased that. Help them understand. Not help them resist. Not help them escape. Just understand. That was not what she meant. But I knew my daughter. I knew when she was choosing her words too carefully. Linda. You need to be very careful about involving yourself in registry operations. The regulations regarding unauthorized disclosure are quite serious. If you've been given access to classification codes by someone within the system, I haven't. Then that person is violating their security clearance and you could be charged as an accessory to. No one gave me anything. I overheard someone talking. That's all. Who? It doesn't matter. It matters if you're planning to interfere with. I'm not planning to interfere with anything. Her voice rose, then fell again immediately. I just wanted to understand. That's all. I thought you might know. I thought you might. She stopped. Swallowed. Never mind. She turned towards the door. Wait. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Linda. Wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. I looked at her standing there, shoulders too high, head slightly bowed. My daughter. My eldest child. Who'd always been too idealistic for her own good, too quick to take up causes, too willing to trust that the world could be made better through good intentions. There's a group. Her voice came out flat. Defeated. In District 7 East. Families, mostly. They're being relocated next week. Under a DPM classification. District 7 East. 220 children. The authorization form I'd signed 3 weeks ago. The capacity designation, 190 units. She turned back to me. I need you to stop it. I see. The words came automatically. And what exactly? They're not sick, Dad. They're not non-compliant. They haven't done anything wrong. They're just... She stopped. Swallowed. Please. You have to intervene. The formality descended like armor. I heard it happen in my own voice, the shift to official register. Self-protection. Distance. I'm not certain I understand the precise nature of your request. You're asking me to interfere with a lawful relocation order that has already been processed through proper administrative channels. She flinched. That's not, I'm asking you to help people. Under what authority would I exercise such intervention? What grounds? I pulled the notepad closer, picked up my pen. Made myself busy. Made this a procedural inquiry rather than whatever she was actually asking. Relocation orders are issued by district coordinators following health assessment protocols and compliance reviews. Regional administrators don't have unilateral authority to countermand standing orders without documented cause. You'd need to provide specific. There's going to be a sweep. Tuesday morning. 0600 hours. I stopped writing. RT7, she continued. Transportation arranged through the southern depot. 3 vehicles. Armed escort. The pen felt heavy in my hand. RT7. The facility designation from the form I'd approved 3 weeks ago. I remembered signing it. How do you know this? It doesn't matter how I. It matters enormously. I put the pen down carefully. Precisely. You're describing operational details that are not public information. Details that would only be available to personnel with clearance significantly above anything you should possess. So I'll ask again, how do you know this? She said nothing. Linda. These are not the sort of questions one asks casually. It's not the sort of information one stumbles across by accident. My throat felt strained. If you've gained unauthorized access to classified materials, or if you've been in contact with individuals who have, will you help them or not? The bluntness of it stopped me cold. There was no procedural answer to that. I looked at my daughter standing in my study. At the fear and determination mixed together in her face. At the careful distance she maintained from my desk, as though proximity might contaminate her. I need more information, I said finally. When did you learn about this relocation? Where are these families currently housed? What specific authority issued the initial order? Has there been any formal appeal filed through proper channels? What documentation do you have regarding their compliance status? Dad. Please. Are there medical records that support their eligibility for exemption? Have they attempted to contact district advocacy services? What procedural options have already been? Stop. She pressed her palms against her eyes. Just stop. I stopped. She lowered her hand slowly. Looked at me with something like grief. You're not going to help, she said quietly. Are you? I opened my mouth. The answer stuck in my throat, too heavy and too complex to force into words. She nodded, as though I'd confirmed something she'd already known. Right. Of course. I don't know what I expected. Linda, you're not being reasonable. You're asking me to compromise my position based on rumors and unauthorized information. You won't tell me how you know about this sweep, you won't provide proper documentation, you won't. Caroline's been detained. The words came so quietly I almost didn't hear them. My mind went blank. Rebooted. Tried to process information that didn't make sense. I'm sorry, what? Caroline. Your granddaughter. Linda's voice had gone flat. Mechanical. The tone people used when repeating information they'd already said too many times. Caroline. She was picked up Tuesday afternoon. She's being held at the Central Processing Facility pending classification review. I sat very still. Caroline. 17 years old. Quiet, careful, brilliant Caroline, who sat at the dining table some evenings with papers spread between her and her younger sister, Amelia. Who covered maps with her arm when I entered the room. Who spoke about checkpoint rotations when she thought no one was listening. My granddaughter had been detained. By the authorities of the state. The system I had served. The system I had trusted. The system that had never, until this moment, felt capable of reaching into my own house.